据媒体报道，特朗普政府是历史上宣布对外制裁次数最多的一届美国政府，平均每天3次。而国务卿蓬佩奥作为美国国务院的最高行政官，往往是由他直接出面宣布制裁对象，阐述制裁理由。蓬佩奥1963年12月30日出生于加利福尼亚州。1986年，他以全班第1名的成绩从西点军校毕业，获得工程管理本科学位。随后，他加入美国陆军，驻扎在冷战时期的西德。1994年，蓬佩奥获得哈佛法学院博士学位，进入律师事务所工作。2010年，蓬佩奥当选堪萨斯州共和党国会议员。2017年1月，在由特朗普提名、参议院投票通过后，蓬佩奥出任中央情报局局长。2018年3月，特朗普总统提名蓬佩奥接替蒂勒森担任第70任国务卿。在参院通过后，蓬佩奥于4月26日宣誓就职，成为首位担任过中情局局长的国务卿。从西点军校、哈佛大学、中情局，然后国务院，作为一名意大利移民的后裔，蓬佩奥凭借突出的个人能力走出一条美国精英的成长之路。从海外驻军时驾驭铁甲，到管理庞大的美国间谍系统，维护美国的核心利益与价值观始终是他政治生涯的主线。或许因为他航武出身，在陆军服役时曾经以坦克排长的身份在东西德边界巡逻。蓬佩奥政治观念保守，是茶党成员，在国家安全问题上持强硬立场，对独裁政权往往表现出对抗而不妥协的态度。
In China, the Chinese Communist Party is shaping a new vision of authoritarianism, one that the world has not seen for an awfully long time. The Chinese Communist Party uses tactics and methods to suppress its own people that would be horrifyingly familiar to former East Germans. The People's Liberation Army encroaches on the sovereignty of its Chinese neighbors. We, all of us, everyone in this room has a duty. We must recognize that free nations are in competition of values with those unfree nations. You can't go make claims for maritime regions that you have no lawful claim to. You can't threaten countries and bully them in the Himalayas.You can't engage in cover-ups and co-opt international institutions like the World Health Organization.
蓬佩奥把西方国家过去以为双边贸易可以促进中国民主化的想法称为中国幻想，并主张从自由对抗暴政的高度来重新审视对华关系。
For decades, the world had hoped that economic integration would lead to political liberalization, the China fantasy. It didn't happen.Chinese Communist Party never wanted to behave like a normal regime because at its core, it's not one. Like Iran, the party is a revolutionary relic. That's why they work together so much. So again, we stepped back. We looked at reality. We remembered first principles and reorganized our policy around a security framework and simple common sense. The good news is we're rallying other nations to our side because this isn't about America versus China. It's about freedom versus tyranny.The
Chinese Communist Party presents the central threat of our times.
蓬佩奥领导的美国国务院高度关注中国人权，其官网设有专门版面列举中国在新疆与西藏侵犯当地人民权益、破坏宗教与言论自由，以及摧毁香港一国两制等方面的恶劣记录。蓬佩奥在对华政策上的一个显著特点，就是把中共与中国人民区分开来，把美国的制裁方向直接指向中共统战组织、中共党员等国家统治机器的实质组成部分。2020年12月4日，蓬佩奥宣布禁止中共统战官员或参与中共统战活动的人士入境美国。在此之前，国务院发布新规，限制中共党员及其直系亲属赴美旅行。蓬佩奥随后还终止5项美中交流计划，称这些计划被北京当局作为大外宣的工具，参与者大多是中国官员而非一般民众。蓬佩奥强调，这些计划精心设计，确保中国官员能享有权限参与访问计划，而非无法享有言论与集会自由的一般中国人民。他说，美国欢迎与中国官员及人民之间的互惠与公平文化交流，而不是那些非互惠的单方面计划。2020年12月9日，蓬佩奥在佐治亚理工学院针对来自中国的威胁发表讲话。
Americans must know how the Chinese Communist Party is poisoning the well of our higher education institutions for its own ends, and how those actions degrade our freedoms and American national security. If we don't educate ourselves, if we're not honest about what's taking place, we'll get schooled by Beijing. Much of the high-end industrial base inside of China is based on stolen technology or technology purchased from other nations. It's not homegrown. Beijing doesn't want Chinese researchers to stay here in the United States. Indeed, after they're trained, they want them to come back. They want to induce their return for the singular purpose of serving the socialist motherland. Look, the party's propaganda apparatus cannot tolerate pesky Americans or Chinese nationals exposing its bankrupt system, or the fact that the Chinese people can actually flourish when they are in free societies.
在信息技术方面，美国国务院倡导干净网络，把中国公司华为等排除在 5G 网络基建之外，只使用可靠的供应商。蓬佩奥认为，中国高科技公司对美国的国家安全构成威胁，不应提供来往于美国的国际电信服务。
And it's why I spend a fair amount of my time talking about the risks that are presented to the world by the Chinese Communist Party. Its acquisition of sensitive technology firms and Chinese companies intent to build out the world's next networks. Your own intelligence chief said that Huawei cannot be fully trusted because it is subject to the power of the Chinese Communist Party.
对于新冠大流行带给世界的灾难，蓬佩奥认为中共负有责任。
The CCP's exploitation of this disaster to further its own interests has been disgraceful. Rather than helping the world, General Secretary Xi has shown the world the party's true face. We talked about how we've seen Hong Kong's freedoms crushed. We've watched the CCP bully its neighbors, militarize features in the South China Sea, and instigate a deadly confrontation with India.
为迎接中共的挑战，蓬佩奥努力寻求国际支持，共同捍卫民主国家的执政原则。
We have to collectively, the West, ensure that the next century is governed by these Western democratic principles, and that will take a concerted effort not just by the United States, but by all of those who love freedom and cherish democracy and the rule of law to ensure that that remains the predominant model for the world for the next century.
对于蓬佩奥卸任后的职业走向，媒体有各种猜测。《华尔街日报》称，蓬佩奥有可能会回到自己的老家堪萨斯州竞选州长或者参议员，也有人预测他会参选2024年的美国总统。